Hey y'all, Old God here. Today I kind of want to break down two different hand cannons, the Fatebringer and Midnight Coup. If you recall, I actually made a video on this last episode. And now in Heresy, they decided to totally bamboozle my last video by re-releasing Fatebringer with new perks and a bunch of like cool perk combinations that actually make it very competitive with Midnight Coup. In the previous video, I said that Midnight Coup was clearly the better hand cannon. And in this video, the answer is much more ambiguous, and I'll go ahead and tell you up front, you can't go wrong with either hand cannon. They are both best in slot. They're literally neck and neck. I'm not even kidding. So I'm gonna go ahead and break down in this video the perks you wanna look for. I'm going to kind of give you the bonuses, the pros and the cons, right? For each of these perks, and kind of explain the origin trait and help you decide on your kind of own journey and adventure, pick your poison. I want to help you kind of pick the hand cannon that suits your needs. So let's go ahead and start off with the perks that make hand cannons really good, mainly in the kinetic slot, right? And these perks are meant to just chew through red bar enemies, nothing fancy, as it is a kinetic hand cannon. As the great Todd Howard put it, it just works. That's the kind of thing you want to be rolling with when you're rocking a kinetic hand cannon. So let's go ahead and see these perks. On all, the perk combinations, we're going to see a variety of things, but you will always see someone, when they're using these weapons, using explosive payload, firefly, kinetic tremors, one for all, and frenzy. Those are the perks that you're going to see. Now, these hand cannons present these perks in different combinations and in different columns, which allows you to kind of like pick exactly what you want. Now, let's go ahead and go over this, right? So, Frenzy is kind of present here first as kind of the mainstay of kinetic hand cannons. It is a classic perk, and a combination that people love to use it with is Explosive Payload Frenzy. This is present on both Fatebringer and Midnight Coup. The next one is One for All. One for All is present on both Fatebringer and Midnight Coup in combination with Explosive Payload. The next one is Kinetic Tremors. On Midnight Coup, you can pair Kinetic Tremors with Explosive Payload. But on Fatebringer, you cannot do that. However, it can pair with One for All instead of Explosive Payload. Explosive Payload is a flat damage increase. One for All has a lot more synergy with Kinetic Tremors, as Kinetic Tremors can actually proc One for All. Now, the last kind of thing we want to look at is Firefly. This can pair with Explosive Payload on Fatebringer, and it can pair with One for All on Midnight Coup. Now, Explosive Payload does not synergize with Firefly whatsoever. It's just two really good perks together. Firefly does synergize with One for All, though, as the AoE explosion can proc One for All. Firefly also just gives a really nice reload bonus, and we'll kind of get to the reload stuff a little bit later, but mainly on Frenzy. I just wanted to point that out. One thing I do want to mention is Firefly can roll alongside Frenzy on Midnight Coup, right? You can do Firefly Frenzy. I would not recommend this roll, as it tends to be kind of bad to stack two kind of reload perks together. I would rather go for more damage with Firefly. So now that we've gone through all the perks, what are the kind of perk combinations I recommend? For low-end content, Firefly on both of these weapons paired with Explosive Payload on Fatebringer or One for All on Midnight Coup, they are awesome for lower end content. Kinetic Tremors, I think, is a little bit weak on hand cannons for a variety of reasons. Namely, it takes 5 to 6 shots depending on whether you enhance it or not, and it tends to be kind of a slow activator. For most, levels, difficulty of content, you're never going to proc Kinetic Tremors. And in Grandmasters, you actually can proc it, so it's a little bit more doable there. I'm not going to bash anyone for using Kinetic Tremors. It's still a great perk. And if you choose to use that in Grandmasters, I totally understand. So we're kind of left here with One for All, Frenzy, and Explosive Payload. And that's exactly what I'm going to recommend here. Explosive Payload paired with either Frenzy or One for All. So to help you kind of choose what you want to use, I'm going to kind of explain the bonuses of each of these perks. And you'll see why Frenzy and One for All are so versatile and usable in all difficulties of content. So we're going to start off with the pros of Frenzy first, right? So Frenzy requires 0 kills to proc. This is really good because in high-end content, getting kills is not exactly as easy as, lower-end content. On top of that, you get a really nice reload bonus and handling boost. This is a selling point for Frenzy for most players, especially on hand cannons where the reload speed might be slower if you can't nail down a good masterwork or a good magazine, and it's even more needed if you can't get either. It also provides a small damage boost. It's nothing big. It actually doesn't really change your time to kill that much at all in most content. It doesn't even make room for you to hit body shots half the time. So the damage bonus is not really too much for Frenzy. It's definitely more of like a handling reload speed perk, but that in and of itself is really good on hand cannons. The pro of One For All is it doesn't provide any reload or handling, but it provides huge damage. It's 35% increase in damage, which is 20% higher than Frenzy. This does allow you to land body shots and still get kills in the same amount of time. It also can help your time to kill a lot in certain levels of content. Just like Frenzy, it does not require any sort of, kills. It requires tagging though. So Frenzy can proc on a 12-second timer as long as you're engaged with combat. Whereas One For All, you have to tag 3 different enemies. Now, remember, One For All can synergize with certain perks, right? Like Firefly and Kinetic Tremors. But that is not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on Explosive Payload. So how does it interact with that? It does interact very well. Explosive Payload actually has an AoE bonus that can tag other enemies and proc One For All. Most of the time, you will be proccing One For All in 1 to 2 shots. So it has a really high uptime, and it's a 10-second timer. The timer cannot be refreshed, but the timer is really long. And as soon as it hits 0, you can just tag 1 or 2 more enemies. Explosive Payload will do the rest for you, and you have that damage bonus going. It's also on demand, so you don't have to wait 12 seconds for, like Frenzy, but you can do it whenever you want. Now, what are the cons of Frenzy? Well, I already said the 12-second timer, right? So you don't need kills with Frenzy, but you have to be engaged for 12 seconds. And in activities like Onslaught, that is totally reasonable, and honestly, like, if you can't proc Frenzy, what are you doing, right? But if your build doesn't support Frenzy, being in combat or constantly tagging enemies, Frenzy can sometimes be a bit annoying. And oftentimes in engagements with enemies, you will not be able to proc Frenzy in time before you kill everything. Encounter design tends to limit Frenzy as well as a lack of enemies to actually kill, right? So in like raid and dungeon content, if you're performing mechanics and stuff, and you're not focusing on enemies, if they are not tagging you, you just might not get Frenzy up, all right? It's also easy to lose. I think it's like 3 or 4 seconds, but you can lose Frenzy and then you have to wait 12 seconds again. So it is not a perfect perk, but it is still very solid just due to the ease of use and the fact that you don't even have to focus on it at all. The cons of One For All, it's a lot worse in lower enemy dense content. Because you don't have as many enemies to tag, and Explosive Payload and Firefly perks, they're not going to be tagging as many enemies, right? So you might not be able to get it up. Also, with One For All, it is not a refreshable timer, so you do have to wait for the timer to go back down to 0, but once it does, you can kind of reset it. But that is kind of a turnoff for a lot of players, right? All right, so now that I've explained Frenzy and One For All, I hope you can pick the perk that suits your needs when paired with Explosive Payload. And now we're going to kind of move on to the guns themselves, right? So what are the bonuses of using these guns? Well, as of, this episode, Heresy, both guns are enhanceable. They both have an origin trait, and they both just have really good perks. So what makes them different? Well, Fatebringer is craftable, first off, meaning that you can guarantee your magazine and masterwork. And if you're deciding to go with something like One For All, that's really helpful, right? Also, it is farmable at Templar, meaning you're going to get a lot of drops of Fatebringer. And if you go for the Time Lost version, you can get multiple perks in the same column, right? You can get a lot of perks in the same column, meaning that your chance of getting a God Roll Fatebringer is really high. Templar is also one of those encounters that's really easy to cheese and blitz through it in under a minute. So you're going to be getting a lot of drops for your time investment. Another bonus of Fatebringer is it has a higher damage potential when paired with Kinetic Tremors and One For All than Midnight Coup's Kinetic Tremors Explosive Payload roll. So if you're a Kinetic Tremors kind of guy, I think Fatebringer is probably the better choice. As for the origin trait, it's super oriented, right? So you get kills, you get some super energy back. It's not a lot, but it's some. And when you cast your super, once your super is done being cast, right, the animation's done, or you finally get out of your roaming super, your magazine is overflowed. It's like, can be upwards of like 20 shots, I think, but it's a lot. So what are some cons of Fatebringer? Well, I gotta say, it doesn't have a lot of utility. It's more of just kind of a workhorse weapon, which is totally fine. It's really good at what it does. And it also doesn't do much for ability regen. It's also only from Vault of Glass, which is a raid. And for a lot of people, even though it's one of the easiest weapons to farm right now, that's just a turnoff for them. So if you're not a raid guy, Fatebringer might not be what you want to go for. But I still think it's very worth it if you can actually convince yourself to hop into a raid group and farm. What are some pros of Midnight Coup now? Well, it comes from Onslaught. That's a pro, right? Sort of. It depends who you are. You know, it doesn't come from a raid. I should probably phrase it that way, right? You don't have to play a raid to get it, and for a lot of people, that's an immediate selling point. They're gonna go for Midnight Coup. Its origin trait is also very good. It supplies either grenade or melee ability energy, depending on the element of your super. So it's a lot better for ability, regen. It also handles a lot better due to its archetype and frame. Even though it is a 140 RPM hand cannon, it is actually a different kind of 140, as it was previously a 150 RPM. Now it's a 140. It kept a lot of those handling stats if you're kind of into more snappy feeling hand cannons. The final bonus of Midnight Coup is I think it's a little bit better for utility. You can roll things like shoot to loot with kinetic tremors if you're into that. I'm not personally into that, but if you're looking for a shoot to loot hand cannon, Midnight Coup probably does that a little bit better. What are some cons of Midnight Coup? Well, as I said, it comes from Onslaught. That is both a pro and a con. Yes, you can focus Midnight Coup at Zavala to make sure you're getting a lot of drops, but you only get one perk in each column. You can't really guarantee the magazine, masterwork, barrel, any of that. Also, just to make matters worse, you're not guaranteed a drop per 10 wave clear of Midnight Coup. You're probably going to get one, but you're not guaranteed. And getting the perk combination that you want might be a little bit harder at Midnight Coup, right? I guess that's a trade-off for not being a raid weapon. All right, so now that I've gone over both hand cannons and you kind of understand the pros and the cons of each one, and you know the pros and cons of Frenzy and One For All, which is kind of their main damage perk, I kind of want to just recap what I've said. Low-end content, any combination of Firefly with Explosive Payload or One For All is going to be great. High-end content, Kinetic Tremors or Explosive Payload with Frenzy or One For All is probably your go-to. I'm leaning more towards Explosive Payload, as I think most people are as well. Probably going for One For All or Frenzy on these weapons. Overall, both guns have very, very similar perks, all of which are very solid. They're neck and neck now, right? And when choosing these perks, just make sure it feels good for you to use. As Todd Howard once said, I'll say it again, it just works. Make sure it's working for you. And overall, just pick your poison, see which one fits your builds, your needs. I've played with certain roles of Fatebringer and Midnight Coup on Warlock, Hunter, and Titan, and each time I have a very different experience. I actually prefer Frenzy on my Warlock, whereas I prefer One For All on my Titan, and I kind of prefer Frenzy on my Hunter as well, but it really kind of just depends on the build. But that's just me, right? Every player experiences the game a little bit different. So choose what works for you. Anyways, hopefully this guide was helpful. Have a good one. Hopefully you get lucky with your drops. Good luck.